Second myth, early mathematics is primarily about learning numbers and shapes. Okay, so when we think about early math, we think numbers and shapes. And that's not so terribly wrong, but it is a little more complicated than that, and certainly our teachers need to think of it in a more complicated fashion. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics has established a set of standards for school mathematics, and in 2000 they included preschool for the very first time in those standards. And so they divide mathematics up into 5 categories. So we've got number, we've got shape, or geometry in spatial sense. Then there's also measurement as a content area, algebraic thinking, and data analysis. And then not only do they look at it in terms of not just a couple of content strands, but 5, but they also specify what they call process standards. Process standards are processes that they think that learners need to go through when they're engaging content, okay? So they think that teachers need to make sure that children have a chance to communicate about the mathematics, communicate to one another, communicate to the teacher, listen to the teacher. All those different kinds of communication need to be going on. They need to have opportunities to reason and proof, to demonstrate why their theory is right, to figure out if their theory is wrong, to solve problems and to represent their ideas, to draw pictures of it, to use models, to do all those different kinds of things. So the point is that the math teacher's version of what math is needs to be something a little more like this rather than simply that it's numbers and shapes, okay? Now let's go into something in a little bit more depth. The most basic part of mathematics for all of us, counting, right? Counting, basic process and something that's developmentally appropriate for young kids to be learning. But what we do miss as adults usually is how complicated this process really is. First of all, kids have to understand that it is a process with a purpose. It's not just people standing around saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 because they can, which is something that kids like to do, and it's a stage in their learning, but it's a method that helps us find out how many of something there are in a collection. So they've got to get that overall big idea about what counting is, right? And then, in order to do it, there are 5 principles that they have to really understand, okay? And the first one is the one-to-one principle. This is the idea that for each object that I want to count, I have to say one word and only one word, right? I can't count this one twice, okay? Or I won't get 3. I've got 3 here, see? 1, 2, 3. If I count this one twice, I'm going to get 4. That won't be right. And I have to count every single one. If I skip this one, I'm going to get 2. Okay? So it's 1, 2, 3. And so as adults, we develop all these strategies for keeping track, right? With objects, we might move them from one pile to the other. You know, if it's a list, we might do tick marks so that we know which ones we've counted. And that's because that one-to-one principle is so embedded. We know we've got to count every single one. We don't want to miss any, and we certainly don't want to count one more than once. But that's something a young child has to learn. It is not obvious to them. There's going to be a little bit of a mess up here with these. I'm sorry about that, but apparently it's a font problem. But then there's the stable order principle. And this is the principle that says that you have to say the counting words in the same order every time you say them. Now, does every 3-year-old say the counting words in the same order every time? No. In fact, there's an interesting developmental trajectory there. They start out, at some point they get a series, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then they start to realize that each of those words has a distinct meaning. And they get mixed up. So they start saying, you know, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And the series is going to come back later. So there's sort of this backward step where it gets out of order, but it's because they're beginning to understand that it's not just a string of words, that each one has its own meaning, And as they become these separate entities, it gets harder to keep them in order, harder to juggle them, as it were, okay? So they have to learn that that sequence, that stable order, is necessary for counting. If we count in the wrong order, we get the wrong amount, right? 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, you know, or 1, 2, 5 is going to give me 5, and when it's actually 3, okay? And then we have the cardinal principle. Okay, it's the trick. On one level, it's on a superficial level, it's the trick. The idea that the last word you say when you count is the total amount. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, the total is 3. Very often with young children, they come to a stage where you say, could you count these for me? And they say 1, 2, 3. You say, great, now how many is that? And they say 1, 2, 3. Because for them, when you say how many, that's a signal to conduct the counting process, which is terrific. You know, yay, they know to conduct the counting process when you say how many. But they haven't quite got yet that they can say this last word and describe the total amount, okay? So that part is still coming. That's something they have to learn. Then there's the abstract principle. That's the idea that these are 3 no matter where they are. There's still 3 over here. There are 3 if I organize them in a different way. Let's make it easier to see. If I've got 2 reds and a blue, there are 3 if they go red, blue, red. And there's still 3 if they go red, red, blue, right? Or blue, red, red, depending on where you're sitting. Okay? It's 3. It stays 3. That's an important idea. Children have to do that over and over and over again. They don't trust it at first. We didn't trust it at first, that it always worked. But it does, but they have to practice it and they have to learn it. And then finally, there's the order irrelevance principle. It doesn't matter in what order I count these. I can count this one first, and this one second, and this one third, and I'm going to get 3. Or I can count this one first, and this one second, and this one third, I'm still going to get 3. Okay, so order irrelevance. So there are 5 very complicated ideas, and they all have to be understood all at the same time. This procedure has to take place where the child says words, focuses attention on objects, keeps track. Okay, it's a really, really complicated process, but they learn it. So counting is complicated.